Today we're talking about William Shakespeare, and I know exactly what you're thinking. You're having a physical reaction right now. Your shoulders are tensing up, you're getting a headache, and you're remembering that one English teacher who made you read Romeo and Juliet while standing in front of the whole class. You're thinking, why are we talking about sonnets? I have a mortgage. I have a check engine light that's been on for 3 weeks. I don't need a history lesson on some guy who wore a giant coffee filter around his neck. Nor do I have the bandwidth for some 400-year-old poetry nonsense. But here is the thing you gotta understand. Shakespeare was not some delicate flower. He wasn't some guy sitting in a castle thinking about his feelings. He was a hustler. He was a guy from the middle of nowhere who moved to the big city and basically became the biggest name in entertainment history. He built an empire out of thin air, while half the city was dying of the literal plague. So let's start at the beginning. Stratford-upon-Avon. It sounds like a place where they sell overpriced candles and pottery that looks like it was made by someone's aunt, but back then it was just a town. William was born there in 1564 in a house on Henley Street that you can still visit today if you want to see where the magic and the glove-making happened. His dad, John Shakespeare, was a glove maker. Think about that. That was the family business. Stitching leather fingers together all day. Imagine the dinner conversations. Hey Dad, how was work? Oh great, Will, I made 42 left-handed thumbs today. My back is killing me. Now go fetch me a warm beer and shut up. But John was a bit of a shifty character. He was a local politician, but he got busted for brogging. That's a real word. It means he was illegally trading wool on the black market. He was like a small-town Tony Soprano of sheep fleece. He was also a moneylender, which back then was just a fancy way of saying he was a loan shark. So William grows up in a house where the dad is dodging the law and hiding wool under the floorboards. That's where he learned about drama. Not from some library, but from watching his old man try to outrun the Elizabethan taxman. At 18 years old, he marries Anne Hathaway. She was 26. Now look, 18 and 26. In the 1500s, that's like a lifetime of difference. And guess what? She was already 3 months pregnant. It was a shotgun wedding. Big Willie gets caught in the hayloft and suddenly he's a husband and a father before he can even grow a decent beard. Then, he just disappears. From 1585 to 1592, the guy vanishes. Historians call them the lost years. They come up with all these theories. Maybe he was a school teacher. Maybe he was a soldier. Honestly, he was probably just hiding from his wife and 3 kids in a pub somewhere. Can you blame him? He had twins and a toddler in a house with no running water. There's a story that he had to flee Stratford because he got caught poaching deer from some local rich guy named Sir Thomas Lucy. Imagine that. The greatest writer in history, running through the woods with a dead deer over his shoulder, swearing at the cops. That's the version of history that actually makes sense. So he lands in London. And London in the 1590s was a nightmare. It was basically a giant open sewer with some theaters built on top of it. You had the plague rolling through every few years, which meant the government would just shut everything down. It's like when people get hit with a blizzard, and suddenly they decide they're going to be experts at knitting sweaters for their cat. It's just pure, unadulterated boredom. When the theaters were open, they were absolute chaos. These weren't quiet places. You had the rich snobs in the galleries, and then you had the groundlings. These were the regular guys, the blacksmiths, the guys who moved coal, the guys who smelled like wet dog. They paid a penny to stand in the mud right in front of the stage. If they didn't like a scene, they didn't leave a bad comment on a message board. They threw half-eaten turnips at your head. They'd yell at the actors. It was like a professional wrestling match, but with more poetry. And Shakespeare? He starts crushing it. But he wasn't just writing. He was a shareholder in the company. He realized early on that the money isn't in the art, it's in the ownership. He owned a piece of the Globe Theater. He was getting a cut of the ticket sales, the beer sales, probably the turnip sales too. He was a businessman who happened to be a genius. But people hated him for it. There was this guy, Robert Greene, a fancy educated guy with a degree. He wrote this scathing review calling Shakespeare an upstart crow, who thought he could write as well as the university guys. He was basically saying, look at this kid from the sticks. He didn't go to Oxford. Who does he think he is? And Shakespeare's response was to just keep writing hits and becoming a multimillionaire, while Robert Greene died penniless and bitter. That is the ultimate way to win an argument. Now let's talk about the words. People say they can't understand Shakespeare. I get it. It's weird. But the reason it's weird is because he was literally making it up as he went along. The guy invented or popularized over 1,700 words. Before Shakespeare, if you saw something gross, you couldn't say it was unreal or lonely or that someone was puking. He invented those words. He invented the word eyeball. Think about that. What were we calling them before? Seeing spheres. Eye globes. He just said, no, it's an eyeball. Deal with it. He invented the word swagger. Next time you see some kid talking about his swag, you can tell him he's actually quoting a guy from 16th century England. And the insults were top tier. He didn't just call you a jerk. He'd call you a clay-brained guts or a naughty-pated fool. He was the king of the roast. He wrote these long poetic takedowns that probably took 10 minutes to deliver, while the other actor just had to stand there and take it. But let's get into the stuff they don't tell you in school. Shakespeare was kind of a shark when it came to money. During a massive famine in Stratford, when people were literally starving to death, Shakespeare was hoarding grain. He was a grain speculator. He was buying it cheap and holding it to sell for a profit when the prices went up. He was actually threatened with jail time for it. So while he's writing these beautiful plays about mercy and the human soul, he's also back home counting his piles of barley and laughing at the poor people. He was a human being. He was greedy, he was ambitious, and he wanted his piece of the pie. Then you have the conspiracy nuts who say he didn't write the plays because he was just a commoner. Give me a break. These people think you need a double doctorate to understand that life is hard and people are crazy. Shakespeare didn't need to go to Italy to write about Romeo and Juliet. He just needed to go to a pub and listen to a sailor talk for 20 minutes. He was a sponge. He took everything he heard and turned it into gold. The idea that a regular guy can't be a genius is just pure snobbery. It's the same people who think you can't be a great chef unless you went to a fancy school in France. Meanwhile, there's some guy in a food truck making the best taco you've ever had in your life. That's Shakespeare. Let's look at the plays for a second. Everyone talks about the tragedy, but if you really look at them, they're just about people being idiots. Macbeth? It's a guy who listens to his wife too much and kills his boss. We've all been there. Maybe not the killing part, but we've all done something stupid because our partner talked us into it. Hamlet? It's a 4-hour play about a guy who can't make a decision. Just kill the guy or don't, Hamlet. He spends the whole play talking to himself in a graveyard. If Hamlet had a hobby or a dog, that play would be 15 minutes long. And Romeo and Juliet? It's not a romance. It's a cautionary tale about why teenagers shouldn't be allowed to make their own decisions. If they had just waited a week, Romeo would have been into some other girl, and Juliet would have been over it. Instead, everybody dies because they couldn't just take a breath and talk to their parents. Eventually, the guy gets tired. He's made his money. He's the most famous writer in London. He buys the second biggest house in Stratford. He gets his own coat of arms, which back then was the equivalent of getting a verified checkmark. It meant he was officially a gentleman. His dad finally got to be a gentleman before he died, all because his son wrote some plays about kings. That's a good son right there. But even his death is weird. He dies at 52. That's young. Some people say he died after a fever he got from drinking too much with his writer friends. Sounds about right. He probably had one last rager, woke up with the world's worst hangover, and just checked out. But the real kicker is his will. He leaves his daughter the house and the money, and then he leaves his wife Anne, one thing, his second best bed. Think about the level of pettiness you have to achieve to put that in your final legal document. This is your last message to the world, and you use it to roast your wife one last time. People try to defend it. They say, oh, the best bed was the guest bed, and the second best bed was the one they shared, so it's actually romantic. No, it's not. If someone dies and leaves their spouse the second best car, it's an insult. He was making a point. He was saying, yeah, you stayed here while I was in London for 20 years. Here's a lumpy mattress. Thanks for the memories. And then just to make sure no one messed with him after he was gone, he had a curse carved into his gravestone. It basically says, blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. He was so worried that some fanboy was going to dig him up that he put a literal hex on his own grave. And it worked. No one has ever moved him. They've done x-rays and radar, and they think his skull might be missing, but they won't open it up because nobody wants to be the guy who gets cursed by Shakespeare. So, that's the guy. He wasn't a saint. He wasn't a snob. He was a guy who worked hard, stole deer, hoarded grain, insulted his rivals, and changed the way every human being on Earth speaks without them even realizing it. Next time you're watching a movie, and there's a plot twist, or a character has a long monologue about their feelings, or someone says they're in a pickle, just remember the guy from Stratford. He did it first, he did it better, and he did it all while wearing a ruff that looked like a giant coffee filter around his neck. Every time you watch a movie with a plot twist, or a guy seeking revenge, you're just watching Shakespeare with a better budget. He's the reason your favorite stories even exist. He influenced the world so much that we don't even realize we're quoting him half the time we open our mouths. Shakespeare was a genius, a hustler, and a guy who saw the world exactly for what it was. A big crazy mess.